You're listening to Life After the Game, brought to you by Gong Show Gear, the show that profiles former NHL players on their playing days and current lives after hockey. Here's your host, Darcy Lynch.
My guest today is Wendel Clark, the well-known former Leaf, 15-year NHL career with stops with the Nordiques, Islanders, Tampa, Detroit, and Chicago, along with his time in Toronto. Welcome to the show, Wendel.
Good to be here.
Since a big part of this show is talking about what former athletes are up to these days, in a moment, Wendel, I want to talk about your various business interests in the Toronto area. But to start by reflecting back on your NHL career and also your hockey career in general, going all the way back to your time in Kelvington, Saskatchewan growing up. One of the very first guests I ever had on this show was Barry Melrose, who of course is a cousin of yours, and he talked about what it was like being from a town of less than 1,000 people and having you and him and Joey Kosar all go on to NHL careers, and of course, your brother Kerry and Corey Kosar also played pro as well. The old saying goes that you're only as good as who you play against. Do you think that speaks to how good the overall talent pool was in the Kelvington area whenever you were growing up to be able to have so many of you go on to success?
Yeah, there was some great development in the area of some great parents that were raising us all, and you had great, and that probably just wasn't our town alone. We had a lot of good kids coming out, but in the close towns, you had the Federicos in Foam Lake and Old Lines in Quill Lake and Chase in Porcupine. So a lot of neighboring towns. It was a good area there at that time.
So you go on to be the first overall pick in 1985 to the Leafs. Hard to believe it's going to be the 30th anniversary of that draft. But in your final season of junior, did you pay much attention to the standings, and were you fairly confident that you were going to go first overall? You look at a year like right now, with it being a given all season that Connor McDavid would be the first overall pick. But in your time, was that something that you were pretty sure it was going to be you? And did you find yourself watching the stats to see who was going to end up finishing last?
No, I never had an idea where I'd be getting drafted till draft day. There was 3, 4, 5 of us that were kind of in the running. They didn't really know at the time who was going to go first and which team and the type of player they're going to take. And so I never knew right till the draft day for sure where I was going. And really, I kind of had a ballpark of teams I thought I might go to. I never knew it was going to be Toronto until the actual day.
When you did break into the league, you made the playoffs in your first 2 seasons in the mid-'80s, and 2 different coaches right away, though. You had Dan Maloney and then replaced, obviously, by John Brophy. And was that an adjustment, not only having coaches at the NHL level, but then to have 2 in your first 2 seasons? And I'm sure it had to be unique having John Brophy, as just about everyone who's been on this show from that area that you played with him. Most had some pretty unique experiences with Brophy.
Yeah, no, it was, like you say, your first 2 years in the league, you're so darn happy just being there and being part of the program and in the NHL for the first time. That they were all great people that I came across when I come in the league, from Dan Maloney to John Brophy. Their heart was in the right spot, and they both liked tough hockey and up and down. So I kind of fit right in the mold with those guys.
The most memorable season during your era for most Leaf fans is 93 in the playoff run against the Kings in the semifinals. But the season prior to that, whenever the major trade went down with Calgary, where you brought in Doug Gilmour, but 5 players removed from your room and 5 more brought in from Calgary, what was your initial reaction like to that trade? That you obviously would have known a lot about Doug Gilmour from playing against him for years, but when you first heard of the trade and whenever he first came to your room, were you pretty confident that he was going to be the type of player that could have a major role in propelling you guys from a team out of the playoffs to going all the way into the 3rd round the next year?
Well, you never really know after a trade what is going to happen or anything like that, but it's something that you get a player and players from Calgary at that time, Dougie being the best player, and you bring a kind of a superstar into your team. It definitely improves every player that gets to play with them. And then you added players that have played through and with 4 Stanley Cups coming from Calgary, so it brought a great attitude as well into the room, an influx of 5 guys that have played on a winning team, so you can really change the attitude of a dressing room as well.
This is Life After the Game, brought to you by Gong Show Gear. This week my guest is former NHLer Wendel Clark. And Wendel, in talking about that 93 playoff run, you had a very unique experience compared to a lot of your teammates when going up against the Kings, given that Barry Melrose was the coach. As I mentioned at the outset, he's a cousin of yours. You grew up in Kelvington, Saskatchewan. And what was that like, having him leading the opposition? And he had his memorable duel with your friend and coach Pat Burns at that time. And did that make it strange at all, being in such an important series and going against a friend and relative that you grew up with?
Well, actually, it was great. Anytime you're playing in something of that level, only 4 teams left playing in the NHL. and you get to play against Barry, who was we grew up with and great friends with, and he's on the other squad, and it created a lot of fun back home in Kelvington, and just a great feeling that there's two guys from a small town still competing for the biggest trophy in hockey.
You were certainly known for playing the quintessential tough role for the Leafs and for all the teams that you played for, and so many memorable fights, including the one with Marty McSorley in that series. And I remember back at the NHL Alumni Gala last year, I was speaking with you, and shortly afterwards when talking with Marty, one thing that stood out to me is the sheer size difference, that a much larger man, like a lot of the opposition that you faced whenever you were dropping the gloves. Is that, when you were fighting guys like Probert or McSorley or so many others, did you think about the size much, or was it more just the circumstance of the game that it didn't even really cross your mind about what the size differential might be whenever you were throwing the mitts to the ice?
No, you can't worry about size. That's just the way it is. You can't change it, and and you're in the middle of it. It's all about self-preservation. So it's a matter of just doing what hopefully is right for your team at the right time to hopefully have your team win.
When you were moved on from the Leafs and you were first traded to Quebec, and you ended up only playing the one season with the Nordiques, but was that a fairly deflating year given the fact that was the first lockout in the 94-95 season, and also the fact that you'd played for so long in Toronto and were such a fan favorite, and then all of a sudden, not only are you moved off to another organization, but the fact that it was the same year as the lockout, did that make it that season a struggle?
No, not at all. It was a lockout season, so it was all kind of up in the air, and then we didn't play till Christmas, and got to play with some great talented players, probably the most talented team player for player that I'd ever played on that team with Quebec.
When you moved on to the Islanders then, third franchise that you played for, but the first outside of Canada, and again, it's a more of a traditional market being in Long Island, but the fact that you were for the first time outside of a Canadian market, did you find that the players, your teammates, handled themselves differently when they're not under the microscope in a market like Toronto?
I don't think they handle yourselves any differently. You're just the players aren't bombarded with the same sort of questions and the same sort of media attention that you are in Canada. So the players really don't have to deal with the things on a daily basis in the United States that they do in Canada.
They always say that it's hard to go back in life, and you usually don't get the opportunity. You were able to do that twice, having 3 stints in total with the Leafs. What was it like that final time whenever you were traded from Chicago to Toronto? What was your gut feeling in the beginning, that understanding that it wasn't necessarily that you were going to retire right at that point, but knowing that you were likely going to have the option to go out on your terms if you wanted to retire as a Leaf?
Well, you didn't really think about it, so you know that that was that time. But it's something that I'm very honored that I was able to retire and be a part of the Leafs organization and retire where I started. That was a huge honor.
Most Toronto fans had a very difficult time watching you in any uniform besides a Leafs jersey, especially whenever you played for both Detroit and Chicago for short stints. That was late in your career, but people thought back to the numerous rivalries that you had, the old Norris division battles between the Leafs and those two teams. But for yourself, was there any weirdness at all to wearing the Detroit or Chicago sweaters? I think back to last summer whenever Josh Georges reportedly turned down a trade to the Leafs, and he talked about having such a bitterness towards the team based on his rivalry with them in Montreal, and he ends up going to Buffalo instead. But you were traded to Detroit, and then it was Chicago after that, but I know you had great experiences with those organizations as well. But did it feel strange at all wearing jerseys of teams that you had such passionate battles against in the past whenever you were with the Leafs?
No, as long as I was playing in the league, it doesn't matter the uniform you was wearing. You get the league that's the highest level, and so to be a part of the league, that's what you wanted. And as long as somebody wanted you, that's where you wanted to be. So that's kind of the way I thought of it, is just playing in the league.
One last question on the playing days, Wendel. Before the stint in Chicago and Detroit, you did have the brief season in Tampa, and you were putting up great numbers there and having a great season. How did you like playing in the sunshine, given that the bulk of your career was in traditional markets?
Well, the best thing about playing in the heat and the warmth, and when you're an older player and you have bumps and bruises, the body feels a lot better on a daily basis in the weather in the South, and that's probably the biggest thing is how much better your body feels playing in those conditions.
And Wendel, to most Leaf fans, you epitomized what the ultimate Leaf was, playing a tough and rugged style, and it was very obvious that you enjoyed playing in the market. And when you hear now of it being often reported that players don't want to sign in Toronto, or that they use their no-trade clause for specific teams to rule out the Leafs, or a lot of Canadian teams for that matter, But given that you had such great experiences in the market, are you surprised at that, or has something changed from your era of playing where it seemed like you embraced playing in the market as well as a lot of your teammates, but now that it doesn't have the reputation of being a market that many players want to go to, has something changed in the last couple of decades that have made it different from whenever you played?
No, I think it all depends on the wins and losses and everything that's going on. The players that usually are quality players that everybody's looking after, they probably need to go put in their contract that they want to be in certain places. So we as an organization have to get back to winning and being in the playoffs, and then it will be a destination that people want to come to. And that's the biggest thing is winning. And you can break it down to a lot of different things that people make excuses for, but in the big picture, it's whether you're winning or losing.
Well, you mentioned and you, of course, are still affiliated with the organization and retired in the Toronto area after your playing days were done. And you've made the transition well. Your name is still very recognizable, and obviously your face in the Toronto market. And is it 2 restaurants that you still currently have at the go, the Wendel Clark Bar and Grill in Vaughan and Burlington?
Yes, the Vaughan is still there, the original one I'm a part of, and then they franchised. Our first franchise is in Burlington, and looking to grow it in other areas. So that's still an ongoing. It's been 6-7 years, and just trying to make it bigger.
Overall, has the bar and restaurant business been a positive experience for you? The reason I ask that is it's something that a lot of former athletes get into, and a lot of players who've been on this show have talked about that being something that as their playing days are winding down that they think, yeah, it'd be great to get my name involved with a restaurant or a particular business. And some have had great experiences with it. I think of a Rob Ray in Buffalo, loves the relationship that he's been able to build with his business partners in his restaurant in Buffalo. However, there's others like Kirk McLean talked about, of all the things he's done since he retired, the only time that he's had a real negative experience is when he got into the bar and restaurant world, and it's something that he wished he'd never ventured into. How's it been for you, and overall, have you been very satisfied with your involvement with the Wendel Clark Bar and Grills?
So far, it's overall positive. It's the people I'm with have been great, and they're the brains behind it, and they run it. I'm just a very small part in that part of it. But it's like I say, all the businesses outside your playing days are all their own ways of running, their own ways of getting to be good, and they're all complicated in their own way. But it's something that we played hockey at one time, and now we have to find out ways to do things and understand that they're all not easy, and you have to learn and use different skills to get them to work.
I mentioned earlier that several former players who've been on this show have went into the restaurant and bar world, but I'm not aware of any who have went into the car center business. You, of course, have lent your name to that as well and have about 4 different locations. And how did that transition happen to get into the car business? And is that something that you're very involved with compared to your restaurants?
Actually, I have more involvement in the car care center than I do the restaurants, but it's the Meineke car care centers, and it's servicing vehicles. We look after everything from tires to the motors and oil changes and mufflers and the work, and it's really just getting people to be reliable and have trust in you and then looking after your vehicles.
This is Life After the Game, brought to you by Gong Show Gear. I'm Darcy Lynch. This week my guest is Wendel Clark, and we've talked about the fact that you're involved in the bar and restaurant world and also in car care centers, and you've had a very diverse number of areas that you've got into after your playing days ended, but another area is public speaking. And I know firsthand I've seen you speak at a function, and I've had several friends who've run into you at numerous speaking engagements, and you seem very comfortable at it. Is that something that you always enjoyed from the time that you came into the NHL? Were you comfortable speaking with the media or with groups of people, or is that something that developed over time?
No, I wouldn't say it's a natural. I would probably say it wasn't something I would be looking forward to doing when I first started out playing hockey. Probably in the public, like playing for a team in Toronto, you got to do and experience a lot of different things public-wise, just doing interviews and such. So that made it a little bit easier and to get used to the transition. But it's I don't think I'm ever 100% comfortable doing it. It's something that I wasn't comfortable to start, but I get more comfortable all the time. It's something that the more you do, the better you can get at it, and you really have to do it to get used to it.
Well, I guess that's one fringe benefit of the Toronto market is if you're not the most comfortable coming in, you're certainly going to get experienced at it quickly, especially whenever you're playing the role of captain as you did. I'm sure you did more than your fair share of media during your career with the amount of time you spent in Toronto to a lot of players who may have played their entire career in the States.
No, it's definite. It helps you. It makes you grow in other areas. You're thinking on your feet, doing the interviews on a regular basis, and it's just another skill set that you learn while you're getting to do it playing hockey. And so you take it all in a positive light. You don't take things in a negative, and see how you can basically round yourself out and make yourself more useful.
We touched earlier on how you're still very much affiliated with the Maple Leafs organization and that you're an ambassador for the team. But given that it's a non-hockey role, do you feel at times like you really miss the actual action of the game? I'm sure when you first retired that it was difficult to watch and not be a part of the on-ice action. But given now that it's a non-hockey role and that you don't have input into player personnel, at times do you find that challenging? Are you thinking of wishing you had control over a game when you're watching it, or are you quite content to just sit back and watch it as a fan?
No, it's like I say, I probably don't watch the game as intense all the time. More intense lately because my son being a part of hockey at the age he's at now, and also in the PR role, you're watching it to be abreast of what's going on, so you can comment on something or have a viewpoint. But I'm not watching it intently like if I was in it and making judgment on players. So I'm more of a organization guy, and I'm pulling for the guys to win because when we're winning, it's a lot more fun around the city.
And since retiring from the NHL, you're also very involved with the NHL alumni based in Toronto. And the fact that there's so many different players are part of the fundraisers and the numerous charity games and whatnot that you guys play with, a lot of them were former teammates, but there's a lot of non-Leafs involved, even though it's based in Toronto. And you come across so many different players that you played with and just as many that you played against. And are there any players that stand out to you that you've really developed a strong relationship after your playing days, and that whenever you played against them during your playing days, it wasn't as amicable, and that they're the type of person that you never thought that years later you'd be able to be sitting around with and having a great time because they just weren't a player that you were that fond of whenever you were playing?
No, actually became good friends with all the guys that play in the game. That's the greatest thing about hockey players is we all have the same things in common, and usually the guys that you battled the most with on the ice are the guys that you probably connect with the best off the ice because you're probably have the same things in common. That's why you battled on the ice. So. No, you meet a lot of good people in the game of hockey, and being around the NHL alumni, it's been great because you get to know the players that you battled against and played against for all those years.
Speaking of great people, Mats Sundin has such a great reputation in the Toronto market, and it's not often that you get the opportunity to play with someone that you were traded for. Your first trade in the NHL, as we mentioned earlier, was for Mats Sundin, and then you were able to come back into Toronto and play with him on two separate occasions. Was your relationship always very strong with your captain, Mats?
No, Mats was probably one of the great guys in the game, and he was a great captain, great person for our organization. He was a leader. He led by example, and just an overall good guy. He got along with the top of the lineup, the bottom of the lineup, the training staff, coaches. He was one of the great people in the game, so it was a great opportunity to be able to play with Mats.
And last question for you, Wendel, before we sign off. I mentioned that Gong Show Gear Clothing Apparel is the sponsor of this show, and Gong Show is a name that can be used to describe some of the craziest games or some of the most that get out of hand. And we talked about you being a rough and tumble player, played it the way that most hockey fans want it to be played. And whether or not you were involved in the fisticuffs or not in a particular game, you were certainly played on the edge and part of some of the most memorable, tough games that have ever been played. Is there one that stands out to you that was just got so out of control that couldn't be classified as anything but a Gong Show?
No, we had a little incident. Probably my second year into training camp, we had a line brawl with Edmonton, and you're wondering why we're getting messed up and that kind of stuff in an exhibition game. But that some of the things, that was the era of hockey, and I think we had back-to-back line brawls with the Edmonton Oilers that time with John Brophy coaching. And you look back now, you go, why are we doing all this stuff in an exhibition game? But that was the heat of the battle, and we were all young guys at that time.
Great stuff, and thanks a lot for coming on the show, Wendel. It's been great catching up with you. Great career watching you play, but it's great to hear that things are going so well for you in retirement. And we certainly know when any of us are in the Toronto area that whether it's getting a bite to eat or getting an oil change, we can look for the Wendel Clark name.
All right, sounds great.
You've been listening to Life After the Game, brought to you by Gong Show Gear, the premier manufacturer of lifestyle hockey apparel. Check them out at gongshowgear.com. Thanks to this week's guest, Wendel Clark. I'm Darcy Lynch. You can follow the show on Twitter at Darcy P. Lynch.